The wind howled like a wounded animal, sweeping across the empty plains of northern Wyoming. Snow whipped in fierce spirals, reducing visibility to near nothing. The world beyond the window of Clint Maddox's ranch house was a blur of white and shadow, as though the prairie itself had disappeared. Inside the sturdy log cabin, Clint sat by the fireplace, a single lamp casting long shadows across the wood-paneled walls. He cradled a cup of black coffee in his calloused hands, the steam curling upward. His dog, Rusty, lay curled on the rug, occasionally lifting his head to growl softly at the wind rattling the windows. The storm wasn't unusual for January. Clint had weathered worse in his 42 years, 35 of them spent on this same land. He'd grown used to the silence. Some men feared solitude. Clint wore it like a second skin. The only sign of the world beyond was the hum of the generator out back and the occasional creak of the wooden beams adjusting to the cold. He hadn't seen another person in 3 weeks, not since the last supply run into town, and truth be told, he didn't mind. Clint wasn't a cruel man, just tired. Tired of town gossip, of pitying glances since his wife Mary had passed 5 years ago. Cancer had taken her quick and brutal, leaving behind a man who buried his pain beneath layers of hard work and harder silence. He took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth sit in his chest when suddenly, a knock at the door. Clint froze. It was impossible. No one just showed up out here. His ranch was 12 miles from the nearest paved road, barely marked on a map. A knock, especially during a snowstorm like this, wasn't just strange, it was alarming. Rusty leapt to his feet, growling now. Clint stood slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle resting against the mantel. He crossed to the door, heart thudding hard in his chest. The knock came again. 3 sharp raps. Then a pause. He opened the door cautiously, rifle lowered but ready. And there they stood, a woman and a little girl. The woman looked to be in her early 30s, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks with melting snow. She was wrapped in a heavy, too-thin coat, clinging protectively to a child who couldn't be more than 6 or 7. The girl wore oversized mittens and a bright red scarf, her cheeks rosy with cold, eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice hoarse. "Our car skidded off the road a few miles back. We've been walking for hours, please. We just need somewhere warm." Clint stared, stunned. Part of him thought it might be some kind of trick, but the storm behind them was real, and so was the desperation in the woman's eyes. He stepped aside. "Get in," he said gruffly. They hurried inside. Clint shut the door against the storm and motioned toward the fireplace. "Sit by the fire. You're soaked." The woman lowered the girl onto the rug near Rusty, who, to Clint's surprise, only sniffed her before settling back down. The child was shivering violently. Clint tossed another log into the fire, the flames crackling to life, and handed the woman a wool blanket from the couch. "Name's Clint," he said. "You?" "Elena," she replied, her voice shaking less now. "This is Sophie." Sophie nodded but said nothing, her small fingers gripping the edges of the blanket tightly. Clint moved to the kitchen and poured 2 mugs of warm cocoa. He always kept a box on hand, though he rarely used it anymore. He set the mugs beside them, then returned to his chair, eyes watching quietly. They didn't look dangerous. Exhausted, yes. Frightened, definitely, but something about the woman's posture, too rigid, too cautious, told him this wasn't just a case of bad weather and car trouble. "You get lost?" he asked. Elena hesitated. "Kind of. We were driving to Montana. Got turned around. In the snow." He didn't press her. Not yet. After half an hour, the warmth started to return to Sophie's cheeks. She yawned and curled up beside the dog, who accepted her without fuss. Elena sipped her cocoa, eyes flickering around the room like she was still preparing to run if she had to. "You're welcome to stay the night," Clint said finally. "Storm's only getting worse." Elena blinked at him. "Thank you." He nodded once and stood. "Got a spare bedroom down the hall. Towels and quilts are in the closet. I'll be up early to check on the generator. Make yourself at home." He walked away without another word. The truth was, her presence unsettled him. Not in a bad way, just unfamiliar. It had been years since another soul, let alone two, had sat in that living room. Years since someone had laughed or moved around the kitchen or asked anything of him, and yet here she was, this stranger with secrets behind her eyes and a child who clung to her like a shadow. Something about them stirred something in Clint he hadn't felt in years, a need to protect, to fix, to care. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the wind rattle the house and the soft creak of footsteps above, Clint Maddox realized something he hadn't admitted to himself in a long time. He was lonely, and for the first time since Mary died, that loneliness didn't feel endless. Because in the middle of a blizzard, someone had knocked on his door and he had let them in. He had no idea how much that one decision was about to change everything. Morning came slowly, wrapped in a thick blanket of white. Snow had buried the world outside Clint Maddox's ranch, smothering the pastures and fencing in total silence. Only the sound of Rusty's paws padding across the floor broke the stillness. Clint rose before dawn, like always. His body moved with the muscle memory of decades spent alone on the land, boots, coat, gloves, and out the door to check the generator. The cold bit at his skin like a warning, but the machine held steady. He stood there for a moment, surveying the horizon. Nothing but snow and sky. No sign of Elena's car, no tire tracks, just the wind brushing over the drifts. Back inside, the scent of coffee mingled with something unexpected. Toast. Clint blinked as he stepped into the kitchen. Elena stood at the stove, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore one of his flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up. Sophie sat at the table, swinging her legs and carefully feeding crusts to Rusty under the table. "Hope you don't mind," Elena said without turning. "I found eggs and bread in the fridge. Figured I could at least make breakfast." Clint grunted, not used to someone beating me to the kitchen. Elena smiled, tired but genuine. "Habit. Sophie's always up early." He sat down, watching them both with quiet curiosity. The girl was different this morning, less scared. She glanced at him now and then, eyes still cautious, but the fear was softer, hidden behind curiosity. Rusty, for his part, had taken a fast liking to her, which said something that dog didn't trust many. "You call anyone yet?" Clint asked. Elena hesitated as she cracked an egg into the pan. "No service. Phone battery died last night." Clint gave a slow nod. That wasn't a lie. Not out here. No cell towers for miles. "I've got a landline," he said carefully. "Runs through the barn, but the line gets temperamental in storms." She didn't reply, just flipped the eggs. Breakfast was quiet. Clint watched her closely, not suspicious, just observant. She moved like someone used to looking over her shoulder, always watching windows, always keeping herself between Sophie and the door. He didn't push. He'd learned long ago that truth came out when it was ready, not when it was forced. After breakfast, Elena helped clean the dishes while Sophie went to the living room with Rusty and a battered book Clint dug up from an old box. As Clint dried the plates, he finally broke the silence. "So where were you really headed?" Elena paused, dried her hands slowly. "I told you. Montana." "What's in Montana?" "Hopefully, a new start." There it was. Truth, cloaked in vagueness. Clint nodded. "Storm's not letting up today. Roads'll be shut down at least. Till tomorrow. You're both welcome to stay." "You've already done more than enough," Elena said softly. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Clint replied more quickly than he expected. She looked at him surprised. "I mean, I don't exactly get many visitors," he added awkwardly. A small smile tugged at her lips. "I figured." They spent most of the day inside. Clint worked on patching a drafty window in the mudroom, and Elena took on the quiet task of folding laundry, never assuming, never asking. Sophie shadowed Rusty like a little sister, and by the end of the day, Clint found the girl curled on the couch beside the dog, fast asleep. That evening, as the snow still piled against the windows and the wind moaned through the chimney, Clint and Elena sat across from each other by the fire. The light danced across her face, throwing golden shadows against her cheekbones. "You live out here all alone?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Just me and Rusty. No family. Had a wife. Mary. Died 5 years ago. I'm sorry." He shrugged. "She was the best part of me. Haven't figured out who I am without her." Elena looked down, fingers twisting in her lap. "Sometimes starting over feels like forgetting, but staying feels like drowning." Clint turned his eyes to the fire. "You running from someone?" The question hung in the air like smoke. She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Yes." Clint didn't press her. She didn't owe him details. Not yet. But her honesty settled something in his chest. A quiet kind of understanding passed between them. After she tucked Sophie into bed, again in the spare room, Elena lingered in the kitchen. Clint poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the table. She took it with both hands. "I'm sorry for not telling you everything. You don't have to. Not unless you want to." She nodded. "I'm grateful. More than you know." Clint looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman barely holding herself together. Brave, but exhausted. Guarded, but not hard. There was a sadness in her that mirrored his own. "Storm will pass soon," he said. "I hope not too soon," she whispered before she could stop herself. Their eyes met. Neither said anything more. That night, Clint lay awake longer than usual. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house. Somewhere down the hall, Sophie's soft laugh echoed faintly as she whispered to Rusty. He didn't know why fate had brought them to his door. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel so empty. One night had become 2. And something told Clint deep in his bones that the storm outside wasn't the only one that had brought them together. Something was changing, and maybe it was just beginning. By the 3rd day, the snow began to let up. Thin streaks of blue appeared between drifting clouds, and the wind settled into a soft, steady hush. The storm had passed, but Clint Maddox could feel it. Something else was brewing. Life on the ranch had changed in subtle ways. Elena had made herself useful, cleaning up dishes without being asked, folding Clint's laundry with silent care, and brushing snow off the porch in the early mornings before he even had his boots on. Sophie, meanwhile, had adopted Rusty as her own. The girl trailed behind Clint when he did chores, asking 100 quiet questions about horses and fences and why the sky looked so big out here. It had been years since Clint heard a child's voice echo through the halls of his home. He didn't mind it. In fact, it scared him how much he liked it. By midday, Clint had managed to get his old pickup truck started. He radioed into town, barely a crackle of a signal, and learned that the main road was still blocked, but the county plows were working on it. "Maybe tomorrow," he told Elena, as he wiped grease from his hands and leaned against the doorway of the barn. "You'll be able to move on." She gave a faint nod, but he noticed how her eyes dropped to the ground. Sophie sat nearby on an overturned bucket, humming softly while drawing horses in the snow with a stick. "Unless," he added carefully, "you're not in a hurry to leave." Elena hesitated. "I don't know anymore," she whispered. "This place feels safe." Clint looked at her. Really looked. She had that look again, the one she tried to hide, shoulders always half tensed, eyes flicking to the horizon every time a sound broke the stillness, like she was waiting for something to come out of the dark. "You don't have to tell me everything," Clint said slowly, "but if you're in trouble, I ought to know what I'm standing in the middle of." Elena's jaw tightened. She glanced at Sophie, who had wandered out of earshot. "My ex-husband," she finally said. "He's not a good man. We were on the run, Sophie and I." Clint folded his arms. "He following you?" "I don't know," she said. "He's connected." His money reaches far. Friends in the wrong places. I was tired of running, so I made a plan. We were headed for a shelter across the Montana line, somewhere he couldn't find us. And the storm got in the way. She nodded. Clint stared out at the frozen pasture, lips pressed into a line. I don't like people bringing danger to my land, he said firmly, but not harshly. But I've never turned away someone who needed help. I'm not going to start now. Elena looked at him, surprised. Her eyes shimmered with something halfway between relief and guilt. Thank you, she murmured. Don't thank me yet, Clint said. If he finds you, it won't be pretty. That night, Clint sat on the porch, wrapped in his old duster, a rifle resting by his side. The stars shimmered overhead, cold and distant. Krusty sat beside him, ears twitching at every sound. Elena came out with 2 mugs of cocoa. You're watching for him, aren't you? She asked, offering him one. I've seen what desperate men can do, he replied. And I've seen what scared women are willing to survive. She sat beside him in silence. The porch creaked beneath their weight. After a long moment, Clint turned to her. He ever hurt you? Elena didn't answer at first. Her hands gripped the mug tightly. He didn't leave bruises, she said at last. Not where people could see them. Clint's jaw clenched. The firelight from inside flickered across his weathered face, and something hard passed behind his eyes. I ain't a lawman. I can't make arrests, he said. But I can draw a line in the dirt. If he crosses it, he'll regret it. Elena stared at him, not with fear, but with a dawning trust she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since she'd knocked on that door, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The next morning, the world was bathed in sunlight. Icicles hung from the porch like crystal spears, and the snow glistened like crushed glass across the fields. Clint saddled up one of the horses and offered to take Sophie for a ride. Elena hesitated, but Clint's quiet patience and Sophie's squeals of excitement convinced her. Sophie rode in front of him, bundled in Clint's oversized coat, her laughter ringing through the open air. They rode slow, just enough for the girl to see the land and feel the wind on her face. This your home? She asked. Been for a long time, Clint replied. Are we going to stay here too? Clint didn't answer right away. You can stay as long as you need. Sophie smiled and leaned against him. That smile broke something open inside Clint. Something long buried. A forgotten longing for warmth, connection, family. And he knew deep down this wasn't just a temporary visit. This was the start of something neither of them had planned. Later that evening, Clint was chopping firewood behind the barn when he noticed it. A set of tire tracks in the snow, far, out along the ridge road. Not the county plow. A different kind of tread. Fresh. Too fresh. Clint narrowed his eyes, axe resting on his shoulder. The storm may have passed, but the trouble? It had just arrived. Clint stood at the edge of the ridge, his boots crunching through the frozen crust of snow. He knelt down slowly, brushing away fresh powder to study the tire tracks again. Wide treads. Heavy vehicle. Not local. It hadn't snowed since last night, which meant the driver had passed through this morning. He looked out across the vast white horizon, open fields, empty pasture, and the narrow road winding back toward town. Whoever it was hadn't come to deliver mail or check the weather. He felt it in his gut. Someone was looking for her. Back at the ranch house, Clint kept what he saw to himself. He didn't want to panic Elena, or worse, Sophie. The little girl had laughed more in the past 2 days than he suspected she had in months. Clint wouldn't let that peace be shattered without cause, but he took precautions. That afternoon, he dusted off the old .30-30 Winchester from the gun cabinet. He cleaned the barrel, checked the rounds, quietly repaired the broken lock on the back barn door. Then he walked the perimeter fence, marking spots where the snow was thin and where footprints might be visible if someone came sneaking through. Inside, Elena noticed the change. Clint moved differently now, more alert, more guarded. At dinner, she waited until Sophie was asleep upstairs before confronting him. You saw something, didn't you? Clint didn't lie. Tire tracks on the ridge. Too fresh. Not local. Elena paled. She leaned against the counter, clutching her mug with both hands. "He's close," she whispered. "He's been tracking me for weeks." Clint nodded. "You think he has people with him?" She hesitated. "He never comes alone. He has friends. Guys who do the dirty work for him. Money buys a lot of silence." "What does he want?" "Control," she said. "He doesn't want me back, he just doesn't want to lose." Clint leaned on the table, his eyes hard. "You ever think about going to the law?" "I tried. I filed a report. Got a restraining order." But he bought his way around. The cops in his town looked the other way. Said it was a domestic matter. One even warned him I'd gone to them. Clint cursed under his breath. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's why I ran. That's why I didn't stop driving until we were miles from anything familiar." She looked at Clint, her eyes suddenly brimming with guilt. "I didn't mean to bring this to your door." "You didn't," he said, his voice calm and steady. He did. The next day, Clint took Elena and Sophie down to the basement. It wasn't fancy. Concrete floor, storage shelves, a backup generator. But it was safe. He showed Elena the bolt-lock door, the thick walls, and the hidden crawl space behind the pantry shelves. "If things go south," he said, "you come down here and wait. No heroics, just stay quiet." She nodded, her face pale but determined. That evening, Clint made a call to the county sheriff. Sheriff Harlan was an old hunting buddy and one of the few men Clint trusted outside the ranch. "I got a situation," Clint said. "Might have a bad man snooping around, can't prove it yet, but I want you to know." "You want backup?" Harlan asked. "Not yet," Clint replied. "Just keep an ear open." "You think this guy's armed?" "I'd bet my life on it." There was a pause. "All right. You see him? Call me first." "I will." Clint hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment, staring at the photo pinned to the fridge. A faded picture of Mary, his late wife, laughing under the summer sun. "She wouldn't want you to do this alone," he murmured to himself. That night, Clint sat up on the porch again, rifle resting across his lap. Elena brought him coffee but didn't speak. She sat beside him, wrapping herself in a quilt. For a while, they watched the stars in silence. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against your ears and made you feel like the world had stopped turning. "You ever think about starting over?" Elena asked softly. "I did," Clint replied. "Then I stopped. Thought it was too late." Elena sipped her coffee. "I thought so too, until I got in that car and just kept driving." He looked at her, the firelight from inside catching the sadness in her eyes. She was still carrying the weight of a past she hadn't shared, a life of shadows and fear. But there was something else beneath it too. Strength. "I don't know what's going to happen," Clint said. "But if you need someone in your corner, I'm here." She looked at him, eyes glassy with tears she refused to let fall. Then she reached out and, for the first time, touched his hand. Not for comfort, for connection. Later that night, long after Elena had gone to bed, Clint heard Rusty growl low at the door. He stepped outside, rifle raised, scanning the darkness. Nothing but wind, trees swaying, snow creaking beneath the weight of its own silence. But Clint knew the signs. They were being watched. He didn't sleep at all. The next morning broke with eerie calm. The sun filtered through frost-covered windows, glinting off the snowbanks like powdered diamonds. It was almost beautiful. Almost. Clint knew better than to be fooled by stillness. Stillness came before the strike. He stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, rifle resting nearby. His eyes swept across the horizon. Tracks from the day before were mostly covered now, but a gnawing feeling sat in his gut like bad whiskey. He didn't have to wait long. By mid-morning, a black SUV rolled up the long dirt road leading to the ranch. It stood out like a rattlesnake in snow. Elena spotted it through the window and froze. Sophie clung to her leg, sensing her mother's fear without needing an explanation. Clint stood by the door watching the vehicle roll to a slow stop about 50 yards from the house. Dust and ice clung to its tires. The engine idled a little, too long before it shut off. Then the door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, expensive coat. Sunglasses, even though the sun barely peeked out from behind clouds. His gait was relaxed, almost casual, the kind of walk that made you more nervous than a fast approach. He didn't look lost. He looked like someone who expected to be obeyed. Clint didn't move. Rusty stood by his side, growling low. The man raised a hand in a friendly gesture, flashing a thin smile. "Morning, sir," he called. "Beautiful land you've got here." Clint didn't respond. He sipped his coffee, keeping his stance firm. No invitation. No welcome. The man continued forward a few steps. "Name's Randall. I'm looking for someone. A woman, early 30s, dark hair, traveling with a kid. Might have gotten caught in the storm." Clint's jaw tightened, but his face gave nothing away. "Don't see many people out this way," Clint replied finally. "Storm drove off most of the wildlife, too." Randall chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Mind if I take a quick look around? Might have passed through. We're just trying to make sure they're okay." Clint stepped forward, just enough to make his presence firm. "This here's private land." Randall stopped. His smile faded just enough to show the edge beneath it. "I understand," he said slowly. "Just doing my part to help a concerned husband find his family." Clint's voice stayed steady. "Doesn't look like you called the sheriff." "Didn't seem necessary," Randall replied. "Besides, we prefer to handle our own affairs." Clint took a long breath, fighting back the surge of anger building in his chest. "Well, this ain't your affair anymore. If the woman you're looking for is smart, she's already long gone." Randall's eyes flashed behind his sunglasses. Clint let the silence stretch. "You best get back in that vehicle," he said finally, his tone like steel wrapped in calm, "before I call the law myself." Randall didn't move for a moment. Then with a slow nod he turned and walked back toward the SUV. He paused at the door and looked over his shoulder. "If you see her, tell her husband says she needs to come home. Before things get as complicated." The threat was thinly veiled. Clint didn't flinch. "You bring any complication out here and you'll find it answered." Randall gave a half smirk, climbed into the SUV, and drove off. Clint stood on the porch until the vehicle disappeared over the ridge. Then he went inside. Elena was pacing in the kitchen, white-knuckled and shaking. Sophie sat quietly at the table, head down. "It was him," Elena whispered. "That was one of his men." Clint nodded. "Didn't give a name, but he knew you. We're here." Her face crumpled in fear. "I'm sorry, Clint. I didn't think he'd find us this fast." He moved toward her, steady as a rock. "It's not your fault. You did what you had to do." She looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "I should leave," she whispered. "Take Sophie and disappear again, before he comes back with more." "No," Clint said firmly. "He's not taking you. Not from here." "But he'll come back," she said. "He always does." Clint's voice dropped low. "Then let him." That night Clint turned the house into a fortress. He checked every door and window, nailed a steel bar across the back door, loaded the rifles, taught Elena how to chamber and fire the shotgun. They took turns watching the front and rear. No, one slept. At midnight, Rusty barked suddenly, ears raised. Clint bolted up, grabbing his rifle. He moved to the front window, squinting into the darkness. Nothing. Still. He could feel it. They weren't gone. They were watching. Waiting. In the safety of the guest bedroom, Elena lay curled up beside Sophie, who had fallen asleep, unaware of the danger looming just outside. Clint stood alone at the window, a silhouette, against the cold glow of moonlight, his rifle at his side, his resolve harder than the frozen ground. They had come looking, but this wasn't just a ranch anymore. This was a line drawn in the dirt, and Clint Maddox wasn't about to let anyone cross it. The next morning broke cold and gray with low clouds pressing down on the land like a heavy blanket, the kind of sky that held its breath waiting for trouble. Clint didn't sleep a minute. His rifle rested on the kitchen table. Rusty hadn't stopped pacing near the door. Elena brewed coffee in silence, her eyes constantly shifting toward the window. Sophie still slept, curled against a pile of old quilts in the guest room. Clint had insisted she stay unaware for as long as possible. She deserved at least that. "Think they'll come back today?" Elena asked, voice barely above a whisper. Clint nodded once. "Or tonight. They're not done. Not after that visit." "I've seen this before," she said. "He sends someone polite first, then someone mean. Then he comes himself." Clint's face was like stone. "If he sets foot on my land, he's going to regret it." She gave a bitter smile. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I know what I'm capable of," Clint said. "And I'm not afraid of men like him." But fear wasn't the problem. Timing was. Clint spent the afternoon reinforcing the barn doors, nailing boards to the windows of the stable, and double-checking his supplies: generators, gas, first aid, ammunition. He wasn't preparing for company. He was preparing for war. That evening, Clint saddled up one of his horses, left Rusty with Elena, and rode out toward the ridge where he'd seen the SUV. The wind whispered low through the pines, and the snow crunched under the horse's hooves. As he crested the ridge, he dismounted and walked the last 100 yards on foot. That's when he saw it. Tire tracks, deep and fresh. Not one vehicle, but two. Footprints led into the tree line, stopped, then doubled back. They'd been watching the ranch all night, and they were still nearby. He scanned the tree line with his binoculars. Just trees, rock, shadows, but something told him he was being watched too. He rode back fast and quiet. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Clint called a meeting in the kitchen. Just him, Elena, and Rusty at his feet. "Tomorrow I want to teach you how to shoot." "Properly," Clint said. Elena looked up, startled. "I've never fired a gun." "Then it's time you learned. We won't let them take you, but if it comes down to it, you need to be able to protect yourself. And your daughter." Elena swallowed hard, then nodded. "Okay." They stepped out behind the barn, the wind cold but still. Clint set up old cans on a fence post. Elena clutched the shotgun awkwardly, her hands trembling. Clint stood behind her, calm and patient. "Feet shoulder width. Lean into it. Keep your cheek close to the stock. Don't jerk the trigger, just squeeze." She took a deep breath. Aimed. Boom. The kick startled her, but the can tumbled off the fence. "Nice," Clint said. Again. By the fifth shot, she was more confident, more grounded. Clint saw the shift in her eyes, fear becoming fire. "She's going to grow up knowing how to fight back," Elena said afterward, wiping her hands on her jeans. "No more running." Clint nodded. "She's got you. She'll be just fine." The next morning, Clint drove into town to check in with Sheriff Harlan. The snow on the back roads had mostly melted, revealing dry earth and tire ruts, too many for comfort. He parked outside the sheriff's station and knocked on the metal door. Harlan opened it with a tired look. "Clint, heard you had visitors." "More than I'd like," Clint replied. "Big black SUV. Man named Randall." Harlan sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "You want me to run his plates? I want to know who he's working for." The sheriff hesitated. "You're not just helping out a lost woman, are you?" Clint didn't answer. Harlan nodded. "I'll see what I can dig up. But Clint, if this guy's connected like I'm hearing, you might be outgunned." Clint narrowed his eyes. "I'm not backing down." "Then be careful." "I always am." When Clint returned, Elena met him at the door, pale and shaken. "What is it?" he asked. She motioned toward the barn. Someone had broken in. The padlock was on the ground, snapped clean through. Inside, saddles were overturned, feed spilled across the floor, and Clint's backup rifle gone. He cursed and stepped outside, scanning the tree line. "They're getting closer," Elena whispered. They're Getting desperate, Clint corrected. That night he slept in the barn with Rusty, shotgun in hand. He wasn't taking chances. Early the next morning, as the horizon just began to glow pink, Clint spotted fresh footprints by the well. He followed them 50 yards into the woods, where they suddenly disappeared. A message was carved into a tree. Trunk. She's ours. Clint stared at it for a long time. Then he raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the bark, right through the threat. The sound echoed for miles. A warning. He wasn't letting her go. Back at the ranch, Elena packed a bag with trembling hands. Sophie sat on the bed, hugging Rusty, silent and wide-eyed. "We have to go," Elena said. Clint walked in, firm but calm. "No. They're getting closer. He's playing with us. Next time he'll come face to face with me. On my land." Elena's eyes welled with tears. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," Clint said. "You don't run anymore, not while I'm breathing." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You're not alone anymore." Outside, snow began to fall again. Light, at first, then faster. As night closed in, Clint set fresh rounds beside every door. He left a lantern burning in the window. He wanted them to see it. Let them come. He was ready. The storm rolled back in just after dusk. Not a snowstorm this time, but something heavier. Tension. Grit. Violence waiting to ignite. Inside the ranch house, every lamp had been turned low. Clint kept the rifle slung across his shoulder as he moved from room to room, double-checking windows, doors, locks. Rusty paced beside him like a shadow, ears twitching at every creak of the floorboards. Sophie had finally fallen asleep in the guest room, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. Elena sat beside her, silently watching her daughter breathe, brushing strands of hair off her forehead with trembling fingers. "She doesn't deserve this," Elena whispered when Clint came to check on them. "No child does," he said. Elena looked up at him, her voice hoarse. "He's coming, Clint, I know it." "I know it too." At exactly 11:42 p.m., Rusty growled and bolted upright. Clint froze by the window. A figure moved just beyond the barn, shadows flickering under the moonlight. Then another, 2, 3, 4. Elena saw it too, peeking out through the curtain. Her breath hitched. "They're surrounding us." Clint grabbed the shotgun and handed it to her. "Take Sophie to the basement. Now, barricade the door. Do not come out until I call for you." She hesitated. "Clint, go. Now." She ran. Clint turned off the last lamp. The house fell into stillness. Then came the sound, a quiet clink of metal, something tapping glass like fingers trailing a knife along a window pane. Then a voice, smooth, cold. "Clint Maddox. Open the door. Let's talk." Clint recognized it. Randall. He didn't answer. "You've got something that belongs to my employer. A woman and her kid. She's confused, emotional. You're not part of this." Clint stood silently behind the door, rifle steady, eyes unblinking. Another pause. Then, "You got 10 seconds to bring them out." Clint spoke, voice flat and hard. "Step 1 foot on this porch, and you'll be crawling back to your employer with holes in your knees." The silence that followed was loud. Then the glass shattered. A brick through the side window. Clint didn't flinch. He moved fast and quiet, taking position behind the wood stove, sighting down his rifle. Another window cracked in the dining room. Then a door creaked. They were testing him. The back porch light flickered. The generator outside groaned, then stopped. "Power out. Amateurs," Clint muttered. He switched to the lantern, dousing all other lights. Footsteps crunched across the snow-covered deck. Then came the sound of splintering wood. They were coming in. In the basement, Elena sat with her back to the door, shotgun clutched tightly in her lap. Sophie nestled beside her, terrified but silent. "Mama?" she whispered. "Yes, baby? Is Mr. Clint gonna stop the bad men?" Elena swallowed hard, tears burning her eyes. "Yes," she said. "He will." Upstairs, Clint moved like a ghost. The first intruder came through the broken window in the kitchen, a big man in a black coat glancing around with a flashlight. Clint let him take one step, then fired. The blast echoed like thunder. The man went down hard, crashing into the cabinets. With a scream. Outside, someone shouted, "Go! Go now!" Two more burst through the front door, one with a crowbar, the other with a pistol raised. Clint rolled behind the table and fired twice. The man with the crowbar crumpled instantly. The other fired wild shots into the wall, then ducked for cover behind the couch. Clint waited. Breath, movement. Then, another shot. The third man yelped and dropped his pistol as Clint's bullet grazed his arm. He screamed and ran back out into the snow, shouting for Randall. Rusty chased him halfway to the barn, barking like a demon. Clint exhaled. 3 down. Maybe 1 left. That's when the front door creaked open again, but this time, it wasn't an underling. It was him. Randall stepped inside, calm, composed, pistol in hand, boots crunching softly on broken glass. "Well," he said, "this is a hell of a welcome." Clint stood slowly, rifle leveled. "You're not taking her," Randall smirked. "You don't even know who she is." "I know enough." "She's a liar," Randall said coldly. "A thief. She took what wasn't hers, and now she's hiding behind a cowboy with a savior complex." "Funny," Clint said. "You talk like a man who's never been hit in the mouth." Randall's smirk faded. "You're not walking out of here with her," Clint said. "Not today. Not ever." For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Randall raised his pistol. 2 shots. Clint dove, rolled, and fired. One shot hit the doorframe. The other hit Randall in the leg. The man screamed, stumbled, and dropped his gun. Clint rushed forward, kicked it away, and pinned him against the wall with one massive hand on his chest. "You think money means you can break women and walk away clean?" Clint growled. "Not out here. Not on my land." Randall's voice cracked. "You'll regret this." "No," Clint said. "You will." He drove a hard fist into Randall's jaw. The man went limp, out cold. Clint stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from a cut above his brow, gunpowder in the air. The house around him was wrecked, but he was still standing. By dawn, Sheriff Harlan's truck pulled up the long drive, sirens quiet but lights flashing. Elena had called from the basement phone once Clint gave the all-clear. 3 deputies hauled away the surviving men. Randall was cuffed and loaded into the back of a cruiser, face swollen and leg wrapped in gauze. Clint sat on the porch, a cup of black coffee in his hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. Elena came out, Sophie in her arms. "They're gone," she said. "For now," Clint replied. "He won't stay quiet long." "I don't care," she said. "He's not the only one who can fight anymore." Clint looked up at her, something soft in his tired eyes. "You were brave." "So were you," she said. "You saved us." Clint shook his head. "We saved each other." The ranch was quiet again, but it would never be the same. Because on that bloody, broken night, something had changed. Not just the house, but the people in it. They weren't strangers anymore. They were something closer, something stronger. They were becoming a family. The sun rose red and full over Maddox Ranch the morning after the attack, casting long shadows over the snow-covered earth, streaked with boot prints and broken glass. The violence had come and gone like a dust storm, but its mark lingered. Inside the house, the kitchen still smelled like smoke and gunpowder. One of the cabinets hung crooked, and a streak of dried blood stained the edge of the doorframe. Clint stood barefoot on the cold floor, sipping his coffee in silence. Elena entered, moving quietly, careful not to wake Sophie. She looked at Clint with cautious eyes. "How are you holding up?" she asked. He glanced at her, then the mess around them. "Could be worse." She gave a small smile. "Could have been a hell of a lot worse." They both knew it. Later that morning, Sheriff Harlan returned, this time with backup, paperwork, and questions. Randall and his remaining goons were in custody. But the law wasn't finished untangling the mess they'd left behind. Clint stood outside while Elena sat in the sheriff's truck, giving her statement in hushed tones. "I've got good news. And bad," Harlan said after she climbed out. "Hit me," Clint replied. "The good news is, we've got Randall on multiple charges. Trespassing, assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering. He's not talking, but the men he brought with him are already spilling to cut deals." "And the bad? Randall's not just some thug. He's got deep pockets. Lawyers from 3 states out. If Elena doesn't go on the record and testify, there's a chance he'll walk." Clint nodded slowly. "She'll testify?" Harlan raised an eyebrow. "She say that?" "Not yet," Clint said. "But she will." That afternoon, Clint found Elena behind the barn, stacking firewood with stiff hands. Sophie was nearby, throwing snowballs at Rusty and squealing with joy. For a moment, the world felt almost normal. "You're thinking about running again," Clint said gently. She paused, her back to him. "I don't know how to live without running. You stood your ground last night. I had no choice." "You always had a choice," Clint said. "And you chose to fight." Elena turned to him. Her face was tired but stronger than before. "He's going to come after me through the courts now, through his lawyers, through threats and loopholes. And you'll beat him there too." She looked at Clint, really looked, and for the first time in years, she believed it might be possible. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'd be more worried if you weren't." She nodded. Then slowly she said, "Okay, I'll testify." Clint's voice was low and steady. "We'll do it together." The next few days passed in a blur of repairs, phone calls, and questions from county officials. Clint boarded up the broken windows. Elena and Sophie helped clean up the shattered kitchen. Neighbors from 3 ranches over stopped by to offer tools, food, even just an ear. And news spread fast. The rancher who stood his ground. The woman who escaped something dangerous. The little girl who never stopped smiling. Because she finally felt safe. By week's end, Harlan called with an update. They're pressing charges in 2 counties. And turns out Randall has a string of sealed complaints from other women. Money made him go away. "Not this time," Clint said. "You're right," Harlan agreed. "Because this time he met someone with a spine and a rifle." A week later, Clint drove Elena and Sophie to the county courthouse. It wasn't a grand place, just a modest building nestled between a feed store and an old church, but it felt enormous to Elena, like walking into the lion's den. Inside, she sat in a stiff chair with Clint by her side, her hands trembling in her lap. When her name was called, she stood slowly, walked forward, and took the oath. She told her story, the whole thing, the control, the threats, the fear, the bruises that never healed. And the night she finally fled with nothing but a gas station, map, and Sophie's hand in hers. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even the defense lawyers had trouble meeting her gaze. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters gathered. Cameras, questions. Clint stepped in front of Elena, shielding her. "No comment," he said. "Let the law do the talking." Then he helped her and Sophie into the truck, and they drove away, back to the only place that felt like home. That night, by the fire, Elena sat curled under an old quilt, watching Sophie doze with Rusty on the rug. She looked up at Clint. "What if he still comes back? What if he finds another way?" Clint met her eyes. "Then he'll find the same thing he found last time. A locked door, a loaded gun, and someone who won't let you fall." Elena stared at him, her voice quiet. "Why are you doing all this?" Clint hesitated, then said simply, "Because when you opened that door and walked into my life, I realized I hadn't really been living." She blinked, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "I don't know what this is between us," she said, "but I know I don't want to lose it. You won't." And for the first time since she'd fled, Elena believed that might be true. Outside, snow fell softly over the ranch. Peaceful this time. Not threatening, not a storm. Just a quiet blanket, tucking the past behind them. Tomorrow would bring new battles, maybe even more fear. But tonight, they were safe. Together. And that meant everything. Spring came late to the Montana range that year. Snow lingered in the shaded hollows of the hills while stubborn patches of ice clung to the fences. But Clint could feel the change in the air. The soft wind had lost its bite, and the earth beneath his boots was finally starting to thaw. Just like him. It had been nearly 6 weeks since the night Randall's men stormed the ranch. 6 weeks of testimony, legal filings, and waiting. Elena had faced court dates with steel in her spine and Clint by her side. Randall's lawyers had tried their games. Delays, discredit, distractions. But the truth, once spoken aloud, refused to go back into hiding. He wasn't going to win this time, and everyone knew it. One warm afternoon, Clint stood at the top of the hill behind the barn, overlooking the valley. His land stretched wide and quiet beneath a sky so blue it looked painted. Sophie ran through the grass below with Rusty at her heels, her laughter trailing on the breeze. Elena came up the hill behind him, brushing her wind-tangled hair from her face. She wore jeans and a light flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, her hands smudged with soil from planting new tomatoes in the garden. "How long you been standing here?" she asked. "A while," Clint said. "Just watching her." "She hasn't had nightmares in over a week," Elena said. "That's a first." Clint nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She's starting to believe she's safe." Elena stepped beside him. "So am I." They stood there in silence for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, looking out over everything they had rebuilt together. "She said something to me last night," Clint added. "Oh?" "She asked if she could call me Papa." Elena froze. "I told her only if her mama said it was okay." A soft laugh escaped her lips, but her eyes glistened. "She's never called anyone that before. She's never had someone worth calling it," Clint said. Elena reached for his hand. "I think we both know she already has." A few days later, a letter arrived from the courthouse in Helena. Clint found Elena on the porch swing, reading to Sophie. He handed her the envelope without a word. She stared at it for a long moment before tearing it open. Her eyes scanned the page, then she smiled. Really smiled. For the first time in what felt like years. "He's done," she said. "Randall took a plea deal, 5 years minimum. No more threats, no more running." Clint exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders in a wave. "That's justice." "No," Elena corrected. "That's freedom." She stood, her hands trembling with relief, and pulled him into a hug. Not rushed, not desperate. Just whole. Sophie ran up to them, her arms around both adults. "Does this mean we can stay forever?" Clint looked to Elena. Elena looked to Clint, and together they nodded. "Yes, sweetheart," Elena said. "Forever sounds just about right." Over the next few weeks, life settled into something that felt beautifully ordinary. Mornings were spent feeding horses and tending the chickens. Sophie rode with Clint along the fences, learning how to guide a horse and check the gates. Elena baked again. She even painted the kitchen the color she remembered from her grandmother's farmhouse. There were no more late-night alarms. No shadows lurking behind tree lines. No strangers on the ridge. Just peace. Just belonging. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast the ranch in gold, Clint lit a small fire pit behind the barn. Elena sat beside him, legs tucked beneath her, while Sophie roasted marshmallows over the flames. "I never thought I'd feel this again," Elena whispered. "What's that?" Clint asked. "Hope. Safety. Home." Clint turned to her. "You built that here." "No," she said. "We did." She looked down at his hand in hers. "We've been through hell, Clint. You didn't have to let me stay. You didn't have to fight for me." "I didn't do it because I had to," Clint replied. "I did it because I couldn't imagine turning you away, Because the second you knocked on my door, something inside me said, "This is where your life starts again." She leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat like that until the stars came out. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep and the house had gone quiet, Clint reached into his dresser drawer and pulled out a small, weathered box. Inside was a simple gold ring. Nothing fancy, just a band passed down from his grandfather. The next morning, he found Elena standing by the pasture, hair caught in the wind, her face turned toward the rising sun. He walked up behind her, slipped his hand into hers and said, "I don't want you to leave, not now, not ever." She turned, surprised by the edge in his voice. "I've lived a long time alone," Clint continued, "and I thought I'd gotten used to it. But now I know I was just waiting." Elena's eyes filled again. "Waiting for you?" He opened the box. She stared at the ring, then back at him. "Yes," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes." Clint placed the ring on her finger. No grand speeches. No audience. Just a promise made under the wide-open sky. They didn't need a church or a preacher. They had the land, the stars, each other. By summer, the ranch bloomed with new life. The pasture turned green and full, dotted with wildflowers and the slow, lazy steps of grazing cattle. The barn was freshly painted. The coop had new hens, and Sophie had named every one of them, Pecky, Dolly, and Butterbean being her favorites, and Clint Maddox. For the first time in a decade, he didn't wake up alone. The wedding was small, just the way they wanted it. They stood under the cottonwood tree behind the barn, Clint in a crisp white shirt and his father's old hat, Elena in a simple lace dress she'd altered by hand. Sophie was the flower girl, beaming with pride as she scattered petals from a tin pail she insisted was more cowgirl than a basket. Sheriff Harlan officiated. He choked up halfway through the vows but blamed it on dust in the wind. There were no big speeches, no reception hall, just a potluck with the neighbors and a bonfire that crackled into the night while guitars strummed and old ranch hands sang songs they barely remembered. But it was perfect, because it wasn't just about starting something new. It was about healing what had come before. The next morning, Clint woke up to the sound of bacon sizzling and laughter coming from the kitchen. He padded barefoot down the hall, pausing in the doorway. There at the stove stood Elena, her hair tied back with a red bandana, wearing his flannel shirt over her nightgown, humming an old Patsy Cline tune. Sophie sat on the counter, kicking her feet, helping crack eggs into a bowl, her giggles filling the room. Clint smiled. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. This was home now. His home. Their home. Over the months that followed, the ranch became more than just a stretch of land. It became a sanctuary. Sophie started school in town. Clint taught her how to ride bareback and rope a calf before breakfast. Elena planted a garden that stretched halfway to the fence line, bursting with corn, squash, and tomatoes by fall. They built a swing from the old oak tree, hung wind chimes on the porch, and repainted the front door, a soft robin's egg blue at Elena's request. And for the first time since his wife Mary passed, Clint found himself looking forward instead of backward. One evening, as the sun set, in orange ribbons across the sky, Elena came and sat beside him on the porch swing, resting her head on his shoulder. "I never told you something," she said softly. "What's that?" "The night I knocked on your door." "I almost didn't." Clint raised his eyebrows. "I was scared you'd send us away, that I'd brought too much trouble to your life." He chuckled. "You did bring trouble." She laughed too, gently nudging him. "But you didn't send us away." "No," Clint said. "Because the moment I opened that door and saw you and that little girl, I knew my life was about to change." She looked up at him. "And you were okay with that?" Clint smiled. "I was more than okay. I was finally awake again." Sometimes they talked about the past, about what they'd lost and what they'd survived. But more often they talked about the future, about raising Sophie, about expanding the ranch, about maybe just maybe, having another child. There was no more fear. No more running. Randall had vanished into the system, and though his name came up now and again, it no longer held power. His threats had been buried under the weight of the truth and the strength of a family that refused to be broken. Autumn brought cool winds and amber light. One morning, Clint saddled 2 horses and called Sophie out to the barn. "Ready for your first solo ride?" he asked. Sophie's eyes lit up. "Really? You've earned it." He lifted her into the saddle, adjusted her reins, and walked beside her down the trail toward the west field. Elena watched from the porch, arms crossed, smiling. Clint looked back at her, tipping his hat, and she blew him a kiss. By sundown, they were back home, Sophie gushing about every rock, tree, and squirrel she'd seen. That night, as Clint tucked her into bed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Papa?" "Yeah, sweetheart. I want to be just like Mama when I grow up." Clint smiled. "That's the best thing I've ever heard." Later, when the house was quiet and the fire was low, Clint sat beside Elena once more on the porch swing. The stars above were brighter than ever. The sky stretched wide and full of promise. He reached for her hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because everything that mattered was already said. In the laughter echoing from the barn, in the warmth of the kitchen, in the steady rhythm of horses in the field, and in the quiet heartbeat of a family, forged through fire, healed by love, and built to last.